Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest installment of Sifted Talks in partnership with Sage. We're just going to give everyone a few seconds to join and connect their audio. Okay, that should do. I'm Damisola Sulaiman, Sifted's fintech reporter, and I'm really looking forward to moderating this discussion on the end of app hopping, how embedded services are redefining the customer experience. Forgive me for being a little bit raspy and sniffly today. Spring gives us warmth and sunshine, but the catch is hay fever. Thankfully, I won't be doing most of the talking today. I'm just a facilitator, and the bulk of our discussion will be up to our incredible panelists. To give you a bit of a preview of what we're going to discuss today, our conversation is going to start with really putting ourselves in the position of the customers in today's world, and then we're going to get into the weeds of how embedded services genuinely add value. And finally, we're going to take a hard look at some of the challenges that can come when implementing embedded services, but also how to overcome them. We've got a very knowledgeable panel today, giving a range of perspectives, and I think it's going to make our chat much more well-rounded. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So joining me, we have Gordon Stuart, who is Senior Vice President for Fintech and Embedded Services at Sage, an accounting, financial management, HR, and payroll SaaS software provider. We also have Kunal Galav, Managing Director of Pleo Embedded at spend management platform Pleo. And we have Samantha Wessels, President for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at Box, an intelligent content management platform. We also have Tom Hipwell, Vice President of Engineering at restaurant management software provider, Nory. Sorry about that. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage you all to submit your questions throughout our conversations in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. If you see a question you like, you can upvote it so we can make sure that what you're most interested in is represented in what we talk about today. And rather than having a standalone Q&A session at the end, we're going to weave in your questions as we go through. So feel free to type in your question as soon as it comes to mind. Don't be shy. We'd love to have an engaging session with you. All right, let's get to chatting. Enough from me. We can start by setting the scene. The backdrop for today's discussion is customer frustration with having to switch between platforms, and everyone these days expects really seamless, user-friendly experiences. So let's start with Gordon. Can you kick us off by describing how fragmented services actually cost businesses a lot when it comes to the way that they interact with their customers?
Yeah, thank you so much, Damisola, and great to be on this with the panel with the other panelists. So I think we think about this all the time at Sage, the small and medium end customers that we serve. And, we do lots of research. We speak to lots of customers. I regularly embarrass my children by speaking to small businesses when I'm out and about on a weekend. And I think one thing that we consistently hear is, the number of different applications that customers now use to run their business just seems to keep expanding. And some recent research that we did said that the average small and medium business has 59 different applications. And this is genuinely causes so much time. There's so much kind of manual reconciliation of data between those different applications. And businesses tend just to want to get on with, doing what they went into business for. If they're a kind of, forestry company, they want to be, chopping down and selling trees and making furniture out of it. If they're a heating and gas engineer, they want to be going and fixing people's boilers, not jumping between multiple different apps and kind of wasting their time, but also that's time spent they could be growing their business. So I think we see this as a genuine challenge for small and medium businesses. But obviously the great thing, and as I'm sure the other panelists will touch on, technology can really help solve that problem. Advancements over the last couple of years, but especially in the last 18 months, mean there's a genuinely much easier way to go and solve this problem. And we've already seen this solved in so many ways with embedded payments, embedded lending, but there's so many other areas of software functionality which can be embedded in different platforms to make a difference for those small and medium businesses.
No, you're 100% right, Gordon, especially when thinking about that idea of, technology's role in creating the solutions. And it also has a lot to do with our expectations. And, we're living in a world where technology is moving really quickly, and that bleeds into every part of our lives. But I'd be curious to hear from you, Samantha, how does that current pace of technological advancement maybe also emphasize some of those difficulties businesses, but particularly small businesses, face when kind of hopping through these millions and millions of fragmented systems?
Well, I suppose from a small business perspective, the fragmentation creates more. The problems become more visible within the organization. So, you've got AI, you've got to adopt AI, you've got automation, you've got tools, And the world, technically, the world is changing so quickly at the moment. It's hard for any business, an enterprise business, but never mind a small business to keep up. And what's happening is we bringing all these tools on top of already very layered and disconnected systems. And then what's happening is it's actually getting worse. So what you need to do is you need to think about, okay, what is the new tech stack that you need for the future? What platforms do you need to embark on and embrace? And how do you really think of the user experience? What do you need to reduce? How many apps can you move out so that you can look at maybe one platform or multiple platforms working with in an ecosystem? So things are changing quite rapidly, and I think it's hard for any business to keep on top of it. You've just got to bear the user in mind and what's going to make their work more convenient, easy to use, so that they remain productive and efficient. And if you keep the user in mind and relook your tech stack with that, I think it'll put you in a good place for the future. But you can't keep layering more tools, disparate tools on top of each other. I don't think that's going to be good for any future business.
You're 100% right, Samantha. It's a challenge for everyone. And when we talk about small businesses, it's almost kind of more pronounced. And that is something that, I wanted us to touch on as well. Gordon's kind of hinted at it. You've talked about it, Samantha. But Kunal, I'll come to you. You might involve some reiterating of what some of the other panelists have said, but it'd be great to kind of describe it properly. What are some of those unique ways that small businesses are affected by these challenges that we've established with fragmented systems, and what about the way that they operate makes them maybe particularly vulnerable to those challenges?
You just pick on what Samantha and Gordon said and use Gordon's stat of 59 different systems and complemented with an average SMB in the UK has about 5 different bank accounts. So if you're a small business owner or a slightly medium-sized business working in the finance team, you're spending your weekends sitting on your dining kitchen table just going through different systems and actually writing things on paper. And where if you want to think about the backbone of the economy, you want to make these businesses focus on their core competency, which, if you're a forestry business, focus on, trees and making furniture. You're a gas boiler business, focus on servicing boilers. And enabling them to focus on their core competency, focus on strategy. So what that means is having the data and the insights, the actionable things that they could do, bringing it all together in a context that they appreciate and they work on a day-to-day basis is what they're looking after. And unfortunately, if you look at the consumer side versus the SMB side, consumer, there's an amalgamation happening a bit, but on the small business side, they have their personal lives, they have their business lives. And how can you ensure that they are looking for, I just don't want to switch between apps. I don't want to build a competency that, I can operate between 59 different banks and 5 bank systems in 1 hour. That's not something to be proud of. And that's the problem we as, industry leaders need to solve for them.
Definitely. It kind of already answers this next question, but I love that the conversation is flowing in such a way that, we're starting somewhere and we're building on what has been said. Just a reminder to the audience, please do send in your questions. When you hear something that excites you, engages you, feel free to poke at it as well. I'll be happy to kind of integrate those into the conversation as we're speaking. Tom, I'm going to come to you now. We're getting a bit of a clear sense of the customer problem with these things that we've discussed in terms of people wanting to focus on what they actually do and not wanting to juggle, 1,000,001 different systems. It's 59. I don't know why I keep saying 1,000,000, but you get the picture. So what are some of those tangible differences embedding services can make for businesses, Tom?
Yeah, it's about pace of execution, I think, is a big part of it, and then also differentiated heavy lifting. So, by way of introduction, Nory is like a vertical SaaS for hospitality businesses, right? So we provide an operating system for restaurant owners to manage, their workforce, manage all their inventory management, and do that all within a single bundle. So we try to provide that consolidated service to our customers. Below that is the detailed implementation of building a payroll system, building an accounting system, building the payment rails. For Nory, we know that problem has already been solved. We don't want to go and do it again. We know that we want to move across many markets and work in the US, Europe, the UK, and Ireland, where we might have slightly different requirements for different types of businesses that we serve in those markets. And that's where embedded really comes to the fore and is really powerful for us, right? It enables us to bootstrap from the experience and the sweat that others have put into solving these problems really, really well, and build a lot faster for our customers than we could do otherwise.
And if I just build on Tom what you said, the key thing in Europe is localization becomes very good. Like on your US and Europe example, where conceptually it could be very easy, but enabling SMEs to one operate in different markets, localized, which is more than just language and currency. It is dealing with Gordon, you would agree, VAT rules and how your different restaurants are set up and how your mileage, etc., are set up, and enabling them to operate across different geographies simultaneously, and also giving them an offer which is actually scalable across Europe. So, and Europe is complex and fun for those reasons that, how can you make embedded actually work? That you can deal with the localization complexity and build the best of breed of what the SMEs are already using, not to make them do something different and use them at the same time.
Yeah, so there's a piece there on the Nory side to me that concrete, for example, is like tip distribution in the US might vary on a market by market basis. And so we really need to understand how that's going to work, and then also work with the payroll provider to do that well. What Nory can bring to the table at the same time is like a deep understanding of labor compliance and how that impacts hospitality businesses, with the type of staff they might have within those restaurants, how they'll be scheduled on a day-to-day basis, what the mix is between that's most efficient for that business. And then we can hand off the rest of actually running the payroll underneath that compliance schedule to a specialist.
And Tom has given us a really good example there of, looking at hospitality businesses specifically. And we've got a question from an audience member who's just asked similarly specifically, but for a law firm. So they're wondering if there's any tips of how a law firm can deal with that fragmented systems problem. There's software for time recording, document management, client bank transfers, AI tools, legal know-how services, and HR platforms. Thinking about that last one, maybe I'll come to you now, Gordon. How can a law firm deal with these problems when we take into some of those idiosyncrasies that they deal with?
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm just checking that's not my wife on there, because she's a lawyer and she's asked me this question several times about her firm she works in. No, I think this is the challenge that you get to when you get to these verticalized domains, which is, well, actually there isn't something generic out there. And I think when it comes to solving that problem, it's really trying to differentiate what is the primary system of work versus the kind of those systems which are more systems of record or kind of systems of operation. And what we've seen at Sage is not only do we embed capabilities into our platform, we also kind of embed our kind of headless APIs out into other people's platforms. So we see it from both sides. And I think the first thing is identifying for that particular customer, for that particular business set is, what is the system, the primary system they're doing their work within. And we see this varies. You can get some very small businesses who actually, it is their business bank account, it is their e-commerce store where they're working every day. But actually, you get to a complex manufacturing business, and actually they'll have a CFO who's running the kind of operations of that business, and they're in their finance system every hour of every day. I think when it comes to the legal sector, which I'm definitely not an expert in, but I have some insight due to my kind of wife's career. I think it's definitely working out how do you find what's the system that either the fee earners are kind of in every day that they're using, and then trying to work out how you can embed those other capabilities. So, once their time recording has been done, how does that make sure that then if you're making any file notes, they get uploaded to the appropriate place? But actually within that, from a billing perspective, actually how you then invoicing the client that you're working for, how do you making sure that the payments kind of fully integrated? So there's probably a few systems there, I imagine, that work together, but it's really thinking, do you as the software provider own that system of work? Or do you own a system of record that needs to integrate, and then it's working out which way do you need to embed in, or do you need to embed out?
And I think it's about configurability, what you said, Gordon. Like if you're talking to a law firm who is using a law system, it needs to be in their context and the user persona or the primary user, and then you need to embed the ancillary services like payments and payroll and invoices sending, or workforce management linked to project-based billing and expenses, etc. in that context. I think that's where, if you dig deep beneath the surface, like underneath the surface, it's about how do you deal with the complexity of having the configurability that it's relevant for the system. So in that context, if, Sage were offering a Sage for lawyers or Pleo were offering a Pleo for lawyers, we would be able to solve the problem. However, if we were to say, there's a law system in which, your accounting is sorted, all your billing is fed to your bookkeeping system, you can tie your workforce management with your billing at a project level, that is where it adds value. That context and configurability becomes really, really relevant and important.
So from a box perspective, I mean, we do quite a lot of work into the legal vertical. We've got over 1,500 different integrations with other different systems. So if you think of, you've got a content platform where all your legal contracts are stored. Every single legal contract has a level of security and permission. So only certain people can access that particular document. So it's really secure. So when you now sending your contracts either to your customers or internally, it's that secure collaboration becomes quite important. Now you bring on AI, you can start to question all those legal contracts. We're bringing in metadata extraction, so at scale. So you can go through all those legal contracts, pull out metadata, which brings your structure to your unstructured data, and then build an approval workflow from that. So that's a content layer platform that we've built. Now, you might be using one or two or three different types of applications where you just use those applications and the content or the contract or the workflows presented within that specific application. And that doesn't just apply to legal. It applies to life sciences, media and entertainment, the technology, tech startups, etc. But I think you need to really step back and say, well, what are the platforms of choice? How do they integrate to each other, and what is the impact on the users? Because I think from a small business perspective, they've got tight budgets, limited resources, still driving growth and trying to scale. And so you need to look at, those overhead costs, the security risks, especially different geographies, with data processing and data sovereignty across Europe, pulling that all together. I mean, it takes an ecosystem to be able to actually deliver that to any organization. And that's where this app hopping and fragmented systems, I think, is going to has caused confusion and a lot of inefficiency in most companies that we speak to.
Can I just build on what Samantha said, if that's all right? Sorry. I think there's something really important there, which is kind of comes through from a trust perspective. So it's also what system does the end business, does the end user trust to be able to kind of drive those kind of workflows? And I think if you're trying to, as Kunal was saying, if you're trying to, from a brand perspective, get into a vertical where you're not known, actually that's probably going to be more challenging, and end customers going to trust you. Whereas if you're already in that vertical, if you're already in restaurants and hospitality, and then you're adding a kind of payroll into your system, for example, even if then you've got it can be powered by a kind of known brand in the payroll sector. There's a really key thing around trust and brand there, of almost people sticking to their lane, but also being able to then provide that in the right kind of platform. But I think that was a nuanced point there that came out what you're saying, Samantha. That trust piece is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as well, if I was a legal buyer at this point in time and I wasn't seeing these solutions on the marketplace that do bundle it, I would have a look, because there is blank space and there's a lot of new entrants building vertical SaaS at this point in time. So I think there's a part of the market there where to look outside the established players and look for these look for these companies that are growing into these spaces and growing into these blank space in these markets. You also know as like AI becomes more and more advanced, there's a big advantage to building with this pattern of building a system of record, building these bundled offerings, right? Because you can run the AI across the entire product surface. So I think we'll see more and more of those entrants into these different verticals, and I think we'll also see them be the market leaders and market winners in those verticals too over time.
So much
But
help.
it's like that headless platform. So we see us, the market going to having these sort of big, very large super agents doing a lot of their work for them, accessing multiple systems. So you're going to have agents working with agents, agents working with humans, accessing all multiple different systems and then presenting it in one view or multiple views to the end user. So the time I think is now to really step back and look at those platforms and rather than just thinking about the technology, but it's also strategically thinking about the process and what processes and the change management and what you need to transform to enable that down the line.
Thank you so much all for that really, really helpful response to that question. And to the person who asked it as well, I feel like that really gave us an opportunity to get into some of the practicalities of this. And we've got some more questions at the moment, but keep them coming, please. But this one from Stephen really links back to what you were talking about there, Samantha, in terms of secure documents exchange. The person asked, where do panelists see secure document exchange and verification fitting into the embedded services stack beyond payments? And you already kind of talked about this, Samantha, in visualizing, where AI will sit and kind of thinking about lawyers and their contracts. So maybe more on the way that really looks like, maybe in Box's experience. And if anyone else has similar experiences as well, feel free to jump in.
Well, I think from our perspective, unfortunately for Box, our heritage is not only secure content, file sync and share, it's actually secure content. So every single document and folder has 9 levels of permissions. So that's locking down your content to whoever has access. So now when you embed those documents into whatever application or whatever AI model, those security permissions apply into the application layer or into the AI models. So I would say, first and foremost, we think you need to look at your unstructured data because it's everywhere. These are files and these are like Excel documents and PowerPoint presentations and pay slips and invoice documents and legal contracts. It's all over the show. So we believe that you need to look at your unstructured data as importantly as you have in the past, your structured data. Organize it, make sure that it's secure so that when you share, it's secure because it's governed. And when your agents and your AI models or any other application or person accesses that content, they can only see what you've allowed them to see. So we put security at the center of everything that we do. And I would imagine, most content providers like a Box should be doing that, but unfortunately it's not as secure as you always think it is.
That's a really important point to highlight. And I'm going to come to you for this one, Tom, another one from the audience. We've kind of talked about AI quite a bit already, but this question really kind of surfaces the role that AI plays in this. And they ask, if AI is seen as an enabler, acting as glue between multiple platforms and business domains, how much integration is the responsibility of each platform and how much will domain moats prevent this? Tom, thinking about your experience with Nory and kind of AI being in your platform, kind of helping bring things together for those restaurants. When you think about your platform being embedded with others, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so a big part of I think the domain mode is massive, right? Because you need so much specialized knowledge to run within each vertical. So we already talked about a couple of examples within hospitality, right? We talked about knowledge of tip distribution, the impact of labor regulations onto the businesses that we support across different markets and how that varies through time. So I think there's huge opportunity there, for specialists to build specialist agents that work across all of this product surface.
Definitely massive.
Just to add, I think if you look at the SMBs with whom we're trying to serve here, a lot of them have very low AI adoption. Like they have heard of it, but they're not looking for AI to just pop up somewhere. And the word enabler is quite critical. That in the jobs to be done that we are solving for and making their life easy, AI is an enabler to make it sound seamless and domain specific modes, understanding the context across different systems and breaking into actionable, usable insight or actionable, usable task for an SMB is where we are seeing that AI becoming an accelerator for embedded platforms and it all coming together for the end SMB customer.
Yeah, so I think to build on that point again, there's like a slight difference, right? So there's AI, which we see as LLMs working kind of generically, solving language related problems, but there's also like specialized machine learning models that might run in each place. So Nory, as an example, is a demand forecasting model for that business. It's specialized to different, say, hospitality businesses, different hospitality settings, predicting demand for a coffee shop versus a seated restaurant, versus an ice cream parlor is going to be very different, right? And that's where that specialization comes into it. That's what we build into as a frame.
And I think just to add on this point, it's really interesting in terms of the sort of generic use and adoption of AI, or almost the consumer level, which is then bleeds into kind of business use for small businesses, versus this idea of this domain specific knowledge. And to bring it back to a real example, you can work at Sage. You can ask any whatever your favorite kind of conversational application LLM to use. I'm not gonna name them all. You guys know, to go and extract information out of an invoice, for example. You can go and ask them to do that. And what we're kind of seeing today is like 94% accuracy, something like that, in terms of some of the results that we've run in terms of extracting that invoice information. We have a domain specific invoice extraction, which is like, I think it's like 5 nines accuracy, right? And the reason that's important is when you start to get into things around financial data and you think about paying your suppliers, you've got to pay them the exact amount. You've got to make sure that transaction, when it's reconciled to the ledger, is categorized in the right way, so you understand you're paying the right tax on it, for example. Or think about someone's payslip being wrong, or whatever it might be in that example. And this is where that domain's accuracy and specificity becomes really important, because when you get into financial workflows, and which is a lot of the things we've been talking about today in terms of embedding, amongst other things, that's where accuracy matters. And actually, generic models don't actually kind of achieve the results that businesses are going to expect. And that's why I think these domain moats will remain, and actually why being able to then embed those capabilities into different platforms, or to be able to consume those yourselves as a platform, becomes really important, because actually 94% accuracy is nowhere near enough when it comes to financial transactions.
Those are really important points that you've all raised about, the importance of being domain specific and really understanding the context, especially when we're thinking about AI. And when we come back to, embedded and this seamless design, it seems like one of those levers behind the scenes that's being pulled of, as a small business, you might not feel the impact of the system really understanding everything that you're talking about, the way your business operates, but that makes a real difference in the way that your experience plays out. So I'd be interested to hear from you, Gordon, actually, what does it take to create that truly seamless design that's almost invisible, so customers don't really feel the weight of the complexity that goes behind those embedded systems?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of elements. I think there's one, which is whoever that kind of primary platform is who's embedding, they need to have a really clear idea from a user experience perspective how they want that to show up. So it's all well and good, you can take someone else's components and put them in your platform, but if that's actually not part of the look and feel and the way that your platform operates, I think that's extremely important. I think then it's around on the kind of embeddable side, the components that go into someone else's platform. I think it's really around the flexibility. Again, it's like the different workflows that will operate in different verticals or in different size of platforms. Having a kind of modularized and headless API approach, it's very important. Again, what someone doesn't want to do is have to embed, a whole monolith of an application if they only want a tiny slither of it. So it's really important that when you're designing embeddable components, I think you make them as flexible as possible, because that then allows, a variety of different platforms to come and kind of consume those different services. But it's really important because, again, we've talked a lot about the customer today, which is always where everything could start. I think the expectations now of customers in terms of the consumer applications they use, in terms of the use of AI, their expectations are changing very, very quickly. So not only do you need to have a kind of owned customer user experience, as I think we've just touched on before, that's also going to have to translate really quickly into a conversational experience, and you really want to own that as the kind of primary platform. But as the embedded provider, you need to, again, to make sure your tech is going to be able to be surfaced and used in all those emerging ways of kind of customer experience.
There was different depths of integration there, right? So there's the kind of a reskin of some components that are provided to you by the embedded provider. There's building your own components and integrating at the API layer. And then there's probably another depth again where you're actually integrating with multiple vendors for that embedded service, right? And that's where you need to build a different set of abstractions internally within the platform business. So you need to think about the invariants within that domain, what doesn't change, anchor to those invariants, and then build a translation layer between those invariants and the embedded provider. So payroll is a great example there, right? Because you use different payroll providers across different markets. And so that's how Nory's built internally.
I suppose it's the future's about being interoperable, not closed. So, because all we're trying to do is reduce friction, simplify operations, and build a foundation for business growth and scale. So, as long as you have, good MCP server and good APIs, and you know your swimming lane, because things are a little bit blurry at the moment, and what you're good at, and the value you can add to all the other providers and the business, that's excellent.
And when we create this, backdrop of the system is really, really well thought out and really thoughtful, when we're dealing with people who aren't, this isn't their area of expertise, these systems. And so they're coming into it from a place of real curiosity, but also, not having as much knowledge about how to really get the best out of things. So I'm curious, Kunal, how do we ensure that with all of this beautiful backdrop and making sure things are designed really seamlessly and really thoughtfully, how can we make sure the customers still get the most value from everything that's been made?
Three things here, Damisola. One is, I think it's really important to focus on the jobs to be done in the domain we are serving the customers, right? So if we take some of the examples, and if we take a restaurant customer versus an accountant, right? They might need the same thing, but in a different context, in a different way. Even something as simple as, expense and a spend and invoices, it's very different in the context they are in. So solving on what the customer need is rather than, the integration problem of the platform is really, really critical. Second is just picking up on Tom's point on, there are three levels, right? So you can have white labeled embedded, you can have specific APIs and build specific journeys. The other side of it is, if everybody had $1 billion to invest in building a platform, the perfect platform would be created. But it's also about, the other side of it is how do you create these in a sustainable way while you're testing with the customers and iterating. So what really becomes important with embedded is, you do a pilot approach, low investment, low risk, you can test it out with the customers. And therefore, as incumbents, the fungibility and the configurability of the platforms become really important, because that's how you start discovering what your customers want. You get the feedback, and the two or three parties that are working together, can actually build a better product for the customer. And the third thing is it's all about collaboration and working together. So, to Samantha's point on interoperability, it's more than the software. It's also across companies that, we're trying to solve for the same customer problem. We're trying to create a, you know, selfishly a competitive mode. So how do we work together to actually, make our ways of working interoperable, which reflects in the experience and the platform ultimately.
I think, Kunal, you said the word that stood out for me was you start with the business problem, and we're saying start with the business problem, not the feature. Customers don't want another tool. They want less friction. They want faster decisions. They want better outcomes, and they want to meet the users where they're working. And so if you come at it with that mindset, I think it becomes easier to find the answers that you're looking for around your tech stack.
Yeah, I think jobs to be done is a great phrase there. So one of the things within vertical SaaS is maybe a little bit different to the building that we've seen with horizontal SaaS over the last 10, 15 years. So in horizontal SaaS, you tend to build to one very narrow specific persona, one narrow specific ICP. Whereas actually within vertical SaaS, you're building for a whole set of folks with completely differing needs who are all going to be power users of your application at the same time. And that's where their workflow specialization really comes into it within the product.
Those are really, really insightful observations. And I think things that you don't always think about as well when you're really considering how a customer is going to get the most out of something. So thank you all for those. And something else that I was thinking about as you were kind of speaking, Kunal, was, this idea of people having everything that they need in one place according to their really domain specific need. And when we're thinking about SMEs as well, it's really valuable to have that kind of single operational hub, single pane of glass, however you want to think about it. And so I wanted to ask Gordon, actually, how do you think embedded services can really push customers closer to that vision of having that single operational hub that is also addressing their really specific needs. Everyone else feel free to come in as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely crucial, and I think as we've talked a lot about today, the kind of convergence between lots of these different kind of workflows we're just seeing almost every day. You know, what I mean, there's an expectation now that they're actually available, and again, it comes back to thinking about, you know, these small and medium businesses and why they go into business. Like, no one really goes into business to pay their taxes. No one goes into business to run a payroll. They go into business because they want to run that restaurant. They want to, you know, be that art curator. They want to be that, you know, shop owner who's selling something very specific, and it tends to come from a place of passion. And actually, again, you know, research that we've done, and even me individually speaking to plenty of small businesses, they're often happy to pay more for that ease of use. Because I think there's a lot of the time it comes down to, well, okay, is it cheaper? Can they do this better elsewhere? But actually about, is it easier? Does it free them up for the time they really want to then use on kind of power in their business? So I think this idea that more things in one place just makes it so much easier for those customers, and they value that ease of use to go in and actually focus on running their business. So I think it's almost in everyone's interest to plan for this much more embedded and integrated world where actually we've got specialist capabilities which we provide. And I think, and forgive it, I'm not sure who said it. I think it was maybe Samantha. Like, let's go and operate in the platform where they're kind of running their business from, where they're kind of doing their work, because that's the expectation, and it genuinely helps those small and medium businesses. And I think if we think, of course, we're kind of operating in a capitalist-like society, right? But there's also an altruistic point of view, which is, especially for those small and medium businesses, they're what powers the economies. If we can get small and medium businesses operating more effective with greater output, that helps everyone in the UK and in all the other geographies that we want to operate in. And there's a genuine, good deed that we can do alongside the kind of commercial outcomes which come from this as well, which I think is very important.
We've come back to that benefit of, giving people more time to kind of focus on what they actually do on their day-to-day, regardless of what that is. And I think that is a real salient point when we're thinking about, the capabilities that this unlocks. But it's always good to flip the script a little bit and look at some of those challenges that might come with implementing an embedded offering, and I guess how they can be overcome as well. So Kunal, I'll come to you for this one. What are some of those challenges that can arise, and what can we do? What can those businesses do, and the software providers, to help them overcome them?
So I'll take the two lenses you've talked about, Damisola. First, the software providers and then the businesses. So for software providers, I think it's a tall undertaking because, one, you're entering into a new domain that you don't have the expertise on. Second, there's always a competition with existing roadmap priorities and the things you are working on right now for your customers. And the third is how easy or difficult it is to, integrate or embed. So I think solving those three problems is quite critical to be an embedded provider, that you make it easy for your partners to do a pilot and get it out to the customer. You are truly partnering with them and actually bringing the expertise and the cohesion with the teams and genuinely understanding the problem statement with them. On the SMB side, I think I'll take a view that they don't need to know that it's an embedded offering or not. The most successful platforms, the SMB just say, "Oh, I'm using this platform. It helps you do." Let's take the legal platform, right? So suppose I can have all my documents secure. I can do all my accounting. I can do all my invoices. I can do my expenses. Everything is seamless for me. So for an SMB perspective, I think it's success if they don't realize and don't know. For us as incumbent software providers, I think it's solving the three things, that it doesn't become a tall undertaking. It doesn't take over your roadmap. You don't need to invest a significant portion of your R&D budget to do it. How can you do it quite quickly? Prove it, do it in 4 to 6 months, and then take a decision whether it's the right thing to do for joint customers or not.
Yeah, to build on that point a little bit, as a buyer of these services, when I evaluate the software providers, you're not just looking at the functionals, like exactly what business services they can provide. You're looking at the non-functionals as well, right? Like, so test environment sandboxing for end-to-end testing and the availability of the environment, uptime availability of the software. Is it set in concrete? Does it modify through time? How much can I customize this? What's the lock-in like over time? Can I get the data out? What data can I get out, and those types of pieces too. So it's a really detailed and nuanced decision. And I think this is one of the ways in which the vendors can also differentiate.
And to jump on what Tom's saying, there's also the cultural side and the connection that you have with the vendors. Like, use your vendors. We've got consultants, we've got AEs and customer success managers who want you to be successful. Attend the webinars, and learn as much as you can from your various vendor or partner, and push us to do what you need us to do. Because I would imagine, being a small business or a medium business, you don't have endless resource, and you can't have multiple people in your IT departments, one looking at security, one looking at content, one looking at the infrastructure. So we're here to help you, and we will work with each other, and I think maybe that's not understood, that we really are there to see our customers be successful, and we have the people that can help make that happen for you.
I think there's just a couple of things I'd add in there. So I think definitely from a platform perspective, I think one of the challenges that I always see is the kind of urge to kind of build and own something. Like, anyone who works with developers on a regular basis, they always think their code's the best. They always think their product they're building is the best, which often it really is. But I think it is, if you think about the payroll domain, for example, payroll is extremely complicated. I think Tom hinted at this before. If you want to go and build your own payroll, it's like, I'm almost like, genuinely good luck, because it is, it's Sage, we've been doing it for 44 years. Like, it's extremely complicated. And we've had feedback from, partners or your potential partners who we discussed, who decided to go down the build route, who then regretted it. But almost kind of, once you're in with something like payroll, you're in. It's very hard to then kind of roll back from that. So I think there's something there. I think the second piece is around the adoption. I think a lot of the time there's a view of, okay, we'll build it and we'll do all the technical work and we'll make it available, and then everyone's going to consume it. Well, actually, no. It's like then learning from the domain experts about, well, how do you pitch payroll? How do you make sure that it's trusted? How do you get someone on board? How do you know that actually someone moving payrolls, that they're probably going to do that after kind of payroll year end? Like, there's a whole bunch of things that you then need to learn as a platform about these domains. And I think, as Samantha was saying, you've got to lean on the partners you're working with, because they do have that domain expertise. But I think when we come back to the kind of SME kind of end customer layer, it all comes down to the kind of trust and that adoption. I think there's two ways to do it, depending on how strong or how you position your brand. If you've got a brand that customers inherently trust, a white labeled approach, doesn't matter what's kind of the end customer in the background, they're going to trust your brand. But actually, if it's an area that your brand isn't strong in, you might actually want your embedded provider's brand or kind of trust mark to show up in your workflow, so they know that it's trusted. And I think probably one of the best examples of this, and I'll make sure I'm not picking a favorite, is, if you think about some of the card networks, like when Visa or MasterCard show up on a website panel or on a point of sale terminal, there's an inherent trust there. And I think there's something around, like, really understanding your brand, where it can be trusted, and also where you might need to leverage someone else's brand. That's going to have the confidence of those end businesses who are using your platform to say, actually, okay, this is I don't know, I'll make it up for Sage's benefit. This payroll powered by Sage, I trust it because I know that Sage are in the payroll game, for example.
All really important points, and I'm so glad that we got the opportunity to highlight them. If you do have any questions for the panel, especially around some of these like really practical challenges that we're discussing, please pop them in the question box and we will try and integrate them into the conversation. But I really enjoyed that point you made, Samantha, about collaboration and the importance of collaborating, and thinking about where you, Tom, and Gordon sit is also really interesting, in that you can both be embedded and are embeddable. And so I like the idea of that collaboration in terms of that dual, identity or side of things as well. So I'd love to hear from you both, maybe starting with you, Tom, in terms of the learnings that you've gained from that experience that can be really helpful for the end customer to understand on both sides of things, on the software kind of side as well.
Okay, so I think the knowledge thing and the knowledge transfer there is like a huge one, right? Like, no one wants to implement a payroll engine from scratch, right? So I think talking to the domain experts, having that like a really strong relationship with the vendor that you're using is really important. There can be a commercial overlay as well, right? Like opportunities to co-sell, partner on deals, or bring people in and those types of things too, which can really help. Because I think to Gordon's point, like the trust part and like, okay, who is this vendor that you're using under the surface? What is their track record? Will they provide for me? Will the cash land in my employees' bank accounts on time and be correct? Right, it's super, super important to people. So I think being able to like run that type of motion together as a team is also really important. Again, these are ways that I think vendors can differentiate.
And anything you'd add, Gordon?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's a real build on Tom, to be honest, but I think it's because it's the relevant point. It's like what we've seen in our both relationships that we've embedded in, but also where we've provided our embedded services, is that operating like one team, where it's a transactional relationship. We'll take your APIs, we'll plug them in, and we'll do the rest. We typically we don't see huge levels of adoption. Where we have that, okay, let's sit down together, let's have a co-development plan, let's have a co-marketing plan, let's work out where Sage is going to play, where the partner is going to play, you know, how much skin are we both going to have in the game? How much are we willing to invest to kind of drive that adoption? These are the things, and it's all very kind of like these aren't kind of like, you know, big high IQ ideas, right? These are just things of working together. It's some of those key principles of kind of, you know, being in business become really, really important, and looking to make sure you've got those shared kind of goals and a vision of, you know, how big this, you know, opportunity could be, what the expectation is. So no one then gets kind of dissatisfied and everyone's working towards the same goal. We found is hugely important. And I think there's another piece around that, which is being able to have a really collaborative environment around kind of testing new things. You know, we've worked with some partners where there's some kind of, you know, what felt at the time like crazy ideas put on the table. And I think Kunal said it earlier, let's test it. Let's go and do a proof of concept with 100 customers and see if that works. And in some cases, we found that some of those kind of radical ideas have been the thing that's changed the trajectory, which has driven huge amounts of adoption versus other partnerships where things can unfortunately stagnate if you don't have that real kind of like connected relationship.
Trust has been such a massive keyword throughout the time that we've been talking about this, and it really ties in perfectly to this audience question that we've gotten from Stephen. And he asks, or they ask, for higher trust workflows like contractor onboarding, what makes embedded services feel genuinely helpful rather than just adding another layer? So I'll give this to maybe Samantha to start.
Yeah, I think it's again going back to you know, the trust of that content layer from our perspective. As I said, you know, the making sure that the people who can access what they can and can't access is very clear and the permissions are there. But then because we're embed, so if you take Guidewire, for example, which is an insurance application, they run the application. That's what they're very good at. What we're good at is managing and securing the content, and that's well known. So we really embed our content layer into Guidewire. You know, the end user accesses Guidewire, it pulls up the contract or the document, which we know is secure, that only that particular user can see. And therefore the work is done at that application layer where the user wants to do the work. So there's a trusted relationship. Now, as a customer or an end client, you can you know, when you're engaging with both Guidewire and Box, do everything you need from a security perspective, GDPR, data governance, compliance, are the models learning on your data, etc. That's all done. And we've got the proof to show you that that's done. So that's where that level of trust comes in. So you know that between Guidewire and Box, they have one integrated systems, you know, delivering the value to the end customer securely. And especially in Europe, you know, that complexity isn't there in the US. But the GDPR complexity and data sovereignty and where's processing and who's learning on my content and my models, which models are learning what, becomes really important here in Europe. And, you know, the French laws are different to the German laws, which are different to the Spanish laws. So trust then does become quite critical. And you can ask all the questions. We're transparent. We'll give you whatever you need to know to give you a level of comfort that the trust should be there and is there.
And
I think just oh, sorry. I was just going to add in terms of that the kind of question, you know, like I think if it feels like there's another layer, you probably haven't embedded the service correctly enough. And I think it's really important in terms of the workflows and outcomes that we've seen be really successful is where it is genuinely seamless. Like that you don't know that there's a different service provider, a different layer, a different set of technology underneath it. And it comes back to that point on kind of user experience. It has to kind of go within that workflow, within that user experience, that it is completely seamless. If it feels like you're porting out to somewhere else, or you've got to sign up to some new terms and conditions, that's probably not living the almost that kind of embedded vision, which I think we've been talking about here today.
And
Yeah, we
Kunal,
just have
to build on that, yeah, perfect timing.
Yeah, so we really think about the product experience. We look for the removal of seams, right? So you should really think of it like as seamless as you move through it. It should be completely transparent to the user. And it applies not just to the workflows, but to Samantha's point, also to the authentication, authorization, permissioning, and those types of things. Like it should feel completely seamless as you move across the product.
There's also the element of trust in the brand that we talked about. So, if you're in the specific question, it's contract onboarding, and if I put a lens of financial services player, they would like to know that they are giving their financial data to a provider. So I think there's a judgment call to be made on, where intentionally adding a step brings trust versus just removing and creating it frictionless, which makes people question, am I sharing my data in the right way? So I think and that also gets to the earlier discussion we were having that, co-creation becomes really important because deep understanding of customers' needs, fears, and what they want, and then building the experiences, which always might not be the most seamless experience, but you're introducing points which actually bring trust for the customer. That's really important.
And I could hear a lot of approval from you on that, Samantha. And I'd like for all of you to think about this. But yeah, we've mentioned kind of complexity and geography. Samantha, you mentioned that. And then with kind of sensitivity of information. But I really loved the point that you both, Tom and Gordon, made on, it shouldn't really feel like another layer. So when we think about, especially when it comes to SMEs and them growing and scaling and having really dynamic businesses that change a lot, and we kind of grapple with all of that complexity, but also that imperative of not wanting it to feel like another layer. What does it take to maintain the integrity of the customer experience in that example? I'll open the floor for this one. And anyone can take it.
Go on, I'll have a go. I think it's being really clear around your outcomes, but also thinking about the focus you'd have if you've got a multi geographical product. It's really trying to think about, well, where are you going to start? Where do you think that first opportunity is? But then also having that kind of end goal in mind. That again, we'll come back to the payroll example because it's really relevant, and obviously kind of Tom and Nory's mentioned about it. It's like payroll is local. There is no global payroll engine that can deal with all the complexities of collective agreements in France versus kind of like local kind of payroll regulations that happen in Germany. These things are local and actually be treated as such. So I think if you, as long as you have that end vision for your business about where it's going, where it's scaling, where that platform is, and having an awareness of some of those kind of limitations, then building that into your plan then helps kind of like helps kind of future-proof some of those future decisions. If you go into it with your eyes closed and think, well, I'm going to choose a payroll provider and they're going to be able to do everything, or they tell me they're going to do everything, you probably haven't done your kind of research well enough. But I think that's where actually quite a lot of the opportunity then comes from if you're an embedded provider, is knowing kind of like, well, actually, this is a distribution play. This is an opportunity for, commercial acceleration, because there are kind of, barriers to entry in terms of some of these markets, that someone isn't just going to turn up with the global payroll engine, which kind of does that. And maybe in the future with AI, someone will be able to kind of pull that together. But I think, some of those sort of domain and now geographical moats that we spoke about become very important in the kind of strategy of how you want to scale your platform.
Yeah, to build on that point again, I think the way in which we come at it is we have a very clear set of principles, right? We know the customer outcome that we're trying to drive, and that's to increase the profitability of the businesses that we work with, right? Drive margin improvement for them. And then we know the product principles that sit behind that, right? We want to do that by, as much as possible, automating actions that are being taken within the platform, driving these types of autonomous actions, because that way, that's how we drive the efficiency within those businesses. That's how we drive the consistency. So as we're looking at how we design these experiences, select vendors, we're thinking about, can we do this with those principles applied?
For us, it's also about simplifying your environment. So, you're almost looking for that one single operational hub, and you want to give that one single operating experience. So it's fortunately, in this unstructured data world that I'm living in, we believe in bringing models and other applications to the content, not taking the content to everybody else's different models, because that gets messy. So it is about simplifying your environment to enable that sort of one single operating experience, which will be coming towards us as we mature with AI in the future.
I think the bar is the experience needs to be simpler, not more complicated.
Yeah.
And I think, Tom made a very good point. Like, what's the key customer objective? It's profitability for an SMB, it's cash flow for an SMB, but the experience needs to be much net simpler. And that's the critical part that we can't lose focus on.
And it's an excellent point to kind of close out the conversation on as well. We've had such a breadth of topics that we've covered today, and it's been really, really engaging. We've talked about the benefits for businesses. We've talked about the perspective of both software providers and businesses when it comes to things like scaling, when it comes to the challenges that they can face with geographies or with trust or with complexity. And we've talked about that real seamless design and what it actually takes to build that from the back end side of things, but also when you're thinking about what the customer is actually going to do with their day-to-day. So really, really thankful to all of our panelists for all of their insight. You've all kind of done the conversation really well. And I think I could have definitely let you guys just have the conversation a bit in the background, which is what we want. And thank you all for your insightful questions as well. I hope we didn't miss anyone. It really helped us put the conversation in a more practical way and kind of focus on some of those specific challenges. And thank you so much to our partner Sage for their support. I loved hosting this talk, and I hope to see you all at the next one. So go to sifted.eu/talks if you want to stay up to date on our next talk, or just click the link that we've dropped in the chat box. That's all from us, but thank you all so much, and hopefully see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.